The goal of this video is to talk about epithelial tissue. Keep in mind there's 4 tissues that make up the human body, and only 4. They are connective tissue, epithelial tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So when we're looking at tissues, regardless of which of the 4 it is, and we are characterizing the tissues or describing the tissues, we are going to describe 2 factors involved. One are the cells, and the other is known as the extracellular matrix. So in this picture right here, I have cells drawn in blue, and I have outside of cells drawn in pink. The pink is what we have described previously as the extracellular fluid, which is composed of both interstitial fluid and the blood plasma. We don't see any blood vessels in this picture, hence we don't see any blood plasma. But extracellular fluid is composed of the fluid around cells. So really what we're seeing in this picture in pink is the interstitial fluid, which is often referred to as the ground substance. And ground substance is generally made up of fibrous proteins and fluid. So when we're describing a tissue, oftentimes we're describing the tissue as being tightly packed with cells and very little extracellular matrix, which once again is the pink area. It's the interstitial space, highly cellular or not highly cellular. So if we look at this slide right here, this is not highly cellular because we see a bunch of extracellular matrix. But if we look at this slide right here, this represents a tissue that is tightly packed with cells and little extracellular matrix. And that's very characteristic of epithelial tissue and muscle tissue, not so much of nervous tissue, and connective tissue is kind of all over the board. There's different types of connective tissue that we will talk about. But the goal, once again, of this video is to talk about epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue lines body surfaces, i.e., on the perimeter of the heart, on the perimeter of the stomach, the whole GI tract, on the perimeter of blood vessels, and it also lines hollow organs. So, for example, the chambers of the heart in green right here would be epithelial tissue. The hollow portion of the stomach in green here is lined by epithelial tissue. The blood vessel here, the middle of a blood vessel is known as the lumen, and the lumen is lined by epithelial tissue, which we see here and we see here. This right here is just a cross-section of a blood vessel. So epithelial tissue provides the internal lining of hollow organs and cavities. In the previous video, we looked at body cavities, like the ventral body cavity, which is lined by peritoneum or pericardial membranes or pleural membranes. Surfaces of organs and of the body is formed by epithelial tissue. The skin, known as the integument, are built by epithelial tissue. So when we're looking at epithelial tissue, we see in this top image right here, this right here in purple is epithelial tissue. And everything in gray would be the extracellular matrix. Epithelial tissue is highly cellular and very little extracellular matrix. The cells are very tightly packed together. So once again, in purple here represents the cell. In these dark circles here represent the nuclei of the cell. Below all epithelial tissue, we find a basement membrane, which we see in yellow here. And we also see an underlying supporting tissue, generally loose areolar connective tissue. This top part of this image, or of this epithelial tissue, is known as the apical surface. And the bottom parts down here, just above the basement membrane, is the basal surface. Apical surface, basal surface. So the basement membrane is an interface that divides the epithelial tissue from the underlying supporting tissue, regulates transport of substances from the supporting tissue to the epithelial tissue, and prevents downward progression or development of those cells inferiorly, at least in this image. Now, I say inferiorly, I'm hesitant to use the word inferiorly because if we look at this structure right here, you can imagine this being the GI tract. You can imagine it being a blood vessel, neither of which have this type or shape of cells. These are simple cuboidal cells. This would really be characteristic of a structure in the kidneys known as the nephron. But if we look at this, this is epithelial tissue, basement membrane in yellow, and the supporting connective tissue underneath that. So directionally speaking, top, middle, bottom. But here, because this is creating a tube, this surface right here is still the apical surface, and this is the basal surface. Apical surface, basal surface, basement membrane. So the basement membrane, as we see here, is below the epithelial tissue. Keep in mind, this is still the basement membrane, though from our viewpoint, it's not really below. But just imagine this top tissue right here. If we were to roll that up into a tube, that's a good way to envision this structure right here. So once again, epithelial tissue is supported by the basement membrane and the underlying loose areolar connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is named or classified based on two categories: the number of layers and the cell type. Here I'm showing the different cell types. And this is it's not as always clear cut as I have it drawn here, but cuboidal, the cells tend to be as tall as they are wide, with a fairly nice round nucleus directly in the center. Columnar cells are taller than they are wide, and the nucleus tends to be at the bottom half or even bottom third of the cell, and also tends to be oval in shape. Now, I will tell you off the bat that when one is looking at epithelial tissue, there can be kind of gray areas as to whether the cells are columnar and cuboidal. So it's really an acquired skill to be able to differentiate from cuboidal to columnar. It's not always as clear cut as we see in this picture. And then the third shape is squamous, where these cells are squashed, if you will, with a flattened nuclei as such. So once again, epithelial tissue is named based on the cell shape and the number of layers of the epithelial tissue or of the cells. Once again, if we look at this one back here, this would be simple cuboidal because these are cuboidal cells and there's only one layer of them. Next video, we'll talk about different types of epithelial tissue.